Welcome to House of History. Last week we've looked at the prehistory of the territories that would eventually be united in the states of Prussia and the Teutonic Order, the warrior monks that colonized it. Their atrocities left permanent marks on the lands, yet it was the Teutonic Knights whose Grand Master, Albrecht of Brandenburg-Ansbach, in 1525 decided to use the Reformation as a pretext to secularize and claim the territories for himself and name himself Duke of Prussia. It was the beginning of a long reign of territory by the ambitious Hohenzollern clan, already Margraves of Brandenburg. This week we'll look at the Hohenzollern dynastic history, how they became Margraves of Brandenburg, and their ambition as a family. Welcome to the complete history of Prussia. It was in part thanks to the prudence and ambition of the Hohenzollern clan that led to the unpromising territory of Brandenburg-Prussia to become one of Europe's most powerful states. The Hohenzollern family was originally from Swabia, a region in southwestern Germany. Around the end of the 12th century they had settled in Franconia, and for the next 2 centuries they enjoyed the title of Burgraves of Nuremberg. It wasn't really a position of rule, they were more or less nobility in name. As burgraves, over the years, they managed to acquire territorial domains in and around Ansbach and Bayreuth in the Holy Roman Empire. In 1417, Frederick Hohenzollern, Burgrave of Nuremberg, a small and wealthy territory, purchased Brandenburg from its then sovereign, Emperor Sigismund. He had helped Sigismund to get elected as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. 400,000 Hungarian gold guilders were paid, and in turn it brought the Hohenzollerns land, as well as prestige. His new title was Frederick I, Elector of Brandenburg, a hereditary title. Brandenburg was one of the 7 electors of the Holy Roman Empire, then a patchwork of states and domains. Prince-electors were members of the Electoral College that elected the Holy Roman Emperor. Frederick suddenly gained much more power than he had had as a simple burgrave. He was one of the 7 princes that elected the emperor. While at first sight it is easy to see this as a reward only with positives, it indeed was a considerable promotion, but it was a burden at the same time. Brandenburg, after all, had the reputation of the poorest of German regions, with robber barons and crime flourishing due to the lack of central authority. In fact, it didn't take long for Frederick to leave Brandenburg, frustrated with his inability to tame the rogue nobility. His son, Johann the Alchemist, threw in the towel as well, and for decades this wild east remained untamed territory that was hardly interesting to the Hohenzollerns. It was Frederick II, Iron Tooth, that eventually managed to settle in the Margravate and rule over its people from 440 onwards, no better or worse than other princes at that time. His nickname, Iron Tooth, certainly doesn't leave much to the imagination as to how he tamed the unruly bunch in Brandenburg. As time went on, the Hohenzollerns spent their times planning strategic marriages and securing inheritance claims around the Holy Roman Empire. And by doing so, they managed to claim parts of Pomerania and Silesia, though these territories did not bring the family much at first sight. But then, by pure chance, the family acquired the biggest of them all, Prussia. And to be honest, it really was pure chance. Now, last episode we closed off with Grand Master of the Teutonic Order Albrecht von Brandenburg-Ansbach, who managed to become Duke of Prussia, which was an achievement from the Polish king. He betrayed his former post and ruled over Prussia unopposed for decades. Ironically, this Grand Master of a militant Christian order now reformed and secularized Prussia and its political institutions. Also ironically, up until then the Hohenzollerns had nothing to do with the Teutonic Order at all. During the change of alliance, we'll call it, of Albrecht, Brandenburg was ruled by Joachim Nestor, Albrecht's cousin. And no, Joachim did not have any contact with his kinsman during that time. They hadn't planned it, there were no secret plots to lay claim to the territory. It was just a Grand Master that betrayed his order, and a family ruling Brandenburg that was fortunate the Grand Master belonged to their family. Suddenly a massive and rich territory fell into their lap, and prospects started to manifest themselves. because, well, it didn't really fall into the lap of the Brandenburg branch of the Hohenzollerns just yet. Whereas Albrecht used the Reformation to lay claim to ecclesial property in Prussia, Joachim Nestor was a staunch opponent of the Reformation. His brother, the Archbishop of Magdeburg and Mainz, enjoyed Joachim's support against the Reformation. This put them in the camp of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. When it came to imperial politics, the Hohenzollerns decided to remain neutral. So once Joachim Nestor and his brother got wind of what their cousin was doing in Prussia, they severely condemned his actions. 10 years after, Albrecht laid claim to Prussia as its duke. Joachim Nestor passed away, and his son, Joachim Hector, became the Elector of Brandenburg. Now, this Joachim Hector, admittedly, certainly seized the opportunity with Prussia. The first thing he did was he converted to Lutheranism, following in his mother's footsteps, though it was against his own religious convictions. He had foreseen that it was for the best, and it certainly would be. He was very slow to impose Lutheranism on his territory, though. Over in Prussia, to the east, in 1568, the old Duke Albrecht passed away after reigning over Prussia for 43 years. His son was the dim-witted 16-year-old Albrecht Frederick, and he succeeded him. He now was Duke in Prussia. Over in Brandenburg, in the 33 years Joachim Hector had sat on the throne thanks to cunning politics and painstaking efforts, he achieved a co-enfeoffment of the Prussian inheritance with the Polish king, due to his marriage to Princess Hedwig of Poland. As he passed in 1571, his son and successor Johann Georg launched a policy of economic strengthening and marriage politics. Now, realizing politics was a dirty game, he wanted to make doubly sure his branch came into the inheritance of the Duchy of Prussia. It gets messier. He ensured his son Joachim Frederick and grandson Joachim Sigismund were married to the daughters of Albrecht Frederick, the new Duke of Prussia. Johann Georg passed away in 1598 and was succeeded by his son Joachim Frederick. Now, Johann Sigismund was first to marry Anna of Prussia. Unfortunately for him, his new father-in-law, the Duke, lived for another 50 years. Johann Sigismund's father, Joachim Frederick, did manage to ensure co-regency over Prussia due to the Duke's mental infirmity. And to make doubly sure no other family could lay claim to the inheritance, Joachim Frederick now married the younger sister of his son's wife. The father was now the brother-in-law of the son, while the wife now doubled as the mother-in-law of her older sister. Very confusing business. But in the end, it would be Joachim Hector's great-grandson, Johann Sigismund, to finally see these inheritance claims come to fruition. Because in 1618, Albrecht Frederick, Duke of Prussia, passed away, and Johann Sigismund finally came into the inheritance. Prussia and Brandenburg were now united under the same Hohenzollern, nearly 100 years after Grand Master Albrecht had decided he preferred to be Duke of Prussia over Grand Master, and more than 200 years later, after the First Hohenzollerns received Brandenburg from Emperor Sigismund. In retrospect, it looks like all of this rapidly developed, and perhaps people want to entertain the thought that all of this was premeditated. But no generation was sure what the next one would bring, and it all was pure chance that eventually a Hohenzollern Prussian state was to be established. Alright, so if you managed to keep up with that, it is worth having a closer look at the short reign of Johann Sigismund, the man that was the first elector of Brandenburg to double as Duke of Prussia, thus creating Brandenburg-Prussia. Frederick the Great, in his History of the House Brandenburg, wrote that the history of his house only really became interesting with the electorship of Johann Sigismund. It wasn't due to his cunning personality, because, well, he didn't have one. It wasn't his prosperous and great ruling abilities, because he wasn't much of an inspiring ruler. And it wasn't the length of his reign either. He reigned for just 11 years. No, Johann reigned from 1608 to 1619, and he drank and ate himself to an early grave. At the age of 47, he passed away, having been unable to rule directly for several years already. So, what makes him so interesting? Well, it was under his, I'd say, less than capable rule that the two great inheritance claims came to fruition. The future generations of House Hohenzollern were offered prospects to, if used right, play a very significant role in the European theater in the future. He wasn't just a vassal of the Holy Roman Emperor anymore, but a duke ruling over Prussia, although the territory remained under Polish sovereignty. Now, before we get to the inheritance claims, marriage politics continued. In 1605, Joachim Frederick betrothed his 10-year-old grandson Georg Wilhelm to the 8-year-old daughter of Frederick IV, the Elector Palatine. The Palatine had one of the best military apparatuses at the time, and the Elector hoped it would bring him aid with the future inheritance claims in the West, as you can see on this map. A treaty between the Dutch Republic, Palatine, and Brandenburg was concluded. 5,000 men would stand ready to occupy and safekeep the territories once it was passed to Johann Sigismund, who ascended as Elector of Brandenburg in 1608, following his father's death. The first claim came to fruition in 1609 thanks to Johann Sigismund's marriage to Duchess Anna of Prussia. It was a claim to Jülich-Klevers in the west. Anna was the niece of John William of Jülich-Kleve, and there was a pact within the family that properties passed down the female line. Suddenly, Johann Sigismund, thanks to his wife, could lay claim to lands in the west far removed from Brandenburg. European marriage politics back then were very odd and prone to chance, I'm sure you'll agree. It was a rather controversial claim and led to Brandenburg being dragged into great power politics. France, Polish Lithuania, Sweden, and Holland were quarreling in that region. What followed was an incredibly complicated display of power politics. The assassination of the French king in 1610 was the only thing that prevented a major war breaking out over the territories. In the end, the territories were divided between the Elector and the other claimant, the Duke of Pfalz-Neuburg. The last decades of the Elector's life are filled with anecdotes of drunken bouts, obesity, and growing lethargic. The second claim came to fruition a year before Johann's death in 1618, the Prussian inheritance in the east. Again, thanks to his marriage. Suddenly, Brandenburg was dragged into Swedish-Polish power politics due to inheriting eastern Prussia. The Brandenburg-Hohenzollern received an enormous new territory, but with it, new conflicts, demands, and dangers. After his death in 1619, his son Georg Wilhelm succeeded him and would reign for 22 years, but a quick study of the map shows that there is an unusual distance between the territories now united under one ruler. Over 700 kilometers of roads and tracks, many, though, impassable swamps and foreign territory. There was no promise that these lands would once constitute a great European power. And the Hohenzollerns didn't immediately realize the potential bestowed upon them. As a matter of fact, 1618 saw the outbreak of what would become 3 decades of religious and dynastic war in the Holy Roman Empire. The 30 Years' War would preoccupy the new ruler of Brandenburg-Prussia, Georg Wilhelm, with entirely different constraints and problems. The 30 Years' War was one of the most destructive conflicts in human history. Caused by both religious tensions and geopolitical motivation, it saw a near complete destruction of the Margraves of Brandenburg. It was very well possible it would never, ever recover from the ravaging troops. Habsburg Emperor Ferdinand II fought against Protestant forces both internal and external to his empire. Initially, the new Elector Georg Wilhelm, a timid and indecisive ruler, declared Brandenburg's neutrality. He figured that was his best bet for survival. That did not stop rebellious forces from trekking through it, though. Brandenburg, after all, had no natural borders, as we have seen on the map. After 8 years of suffering the plunder by foreign soldiers in Brandenburg, Georg Wilhelm finally allied himself with the emperor, which ironically devastated his lands even more, as the imperial supreme commander, Count Albrecht von Wallenstein, was notorious for extracting provisions and lodgings for his troops. These now eagerly used Brandenburg as a base for their war efforts. In 1630, Sweden entered the war. The Swedish king Gustavus Adolphus now twisted Georg Wilhelm's arm in switching sides and supporting the Swedes. The Elector had no choice but to do so. One reason for switching, besides Swedish intimidation, was the fact that the imperial forces sacked the city of Magdeburg. The Elector's uncle happened to be the administrator of the city. It resulted in the deaths of over 20,000 civilians and defenders, and is considered the worst massacre of the entire war. Nevertheless, 2 years later, in 1632, the Swedish king was killed in battle, and the prospects of war switched again. So did the Elector, who in 1635 once again joined the Emperor. Unfortunately for the Elector, the balance of power shifted once again, concluding this treaty. The Swedes gained the upper hand again, and for the last 4 years of his life he tried to expel the ravaging Swedes from Brandenburg. The Swedes now considered themselves the lords of the Mark. If that wasn't bad enough, during this time even his own troops started razing his cities and lands. See, Georg Wilhelm had hired mercenaries in despair against the Swedes but was unable to pay them, which resulted in these sellswords, ensuring their own payment from his lands. It got so bad that the Elector was forced to flee his own territory in 1637. A broken man, he fled to his duchy, Prussia, as Brandenburg was overtaken by the Swedes and mutinying troops. During this time, key cities lost up to 2/3 of their population, some even over 80%. Brandenburg was turned into a plundered, burning mess. But not Prussia, not that territory to the east, to which the Elector fled. The duchy to the east had survived a 30 years war, more or less unscathed. As a result, it became the center, albeit temporarily, of the Hohenzollern lands and the economic basis for the reconstruction of Brandenburg. Up until his death in 1640, Georg Wilhelm would stay in Königsberg. After his death, his son Frederick Wilhelm presided over the resurgence of the Hohenzollern lands. This new elector would reign over his lands for the next 48 years. When he ascended, Brandenburg stood on the edge of the abyss with virtually all its territories occupied, and the 30 Years' War not even over for another 8 years. The only way to protect his territories, the new elector figured, was to create a flexible, disciplined fighting force. It became the overwhelming central tenet of his entire reign. This new elector of Prussia would go down in the history books as Frederick, the Great Elector. Next week, we'll examine the 30 Years' War and Brandenburg's role a bit more in depth, and the reign of Frederick Wilhelm, who pulled Brandenburg-Prussia out of the mud, although it was marked by non-stop war. If that sounds interesting, consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you very much for watching this video, and make sure you check out the playlist with the complete history of Prussia on screen. I would also like to thank all my patrons for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider checking me out on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you will already gain access to the exclusive Patreon series. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.